The government gangsters in Washington, D.C. have one main operational arm. That is a two-tier system of justice that they choose to weaponize and politicize because we care more about America than they do.
We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
We're blessed by God to have Donald Trump be our juggernaut of justice.
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. Kash Patel is the latest name to be mentioned as one of Donald Trump's nominees for a big job, this time FBI director. Now, I don't know about you, but I only knew a little bit about Mr. Patel, and I was looking for who we could get on the show to really give us some good information, who's neither going to be hysterically opposed or loyally supportive. Well, look no further, obviously, than our very own Emily Jashinsky, who is sitting there in our Washington, D.C. bureau and who has all the intel. Emily, welcome back.
Hi, Freddie. Thanks for having me.
This episode is sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Lumen will tell you if you're burning mostly fat or carbs. Then, Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time, and Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. It can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy throughout the hormonal shifts, so you can keep up your energy and starve off cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/unheard to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/unheard for 15% off your purchase.
So I would love you to give us a bit of a tutorial here from the beginning. If you've never heard of this guy, because the liberal media are absolutely freaking out, meanwhile some of the Trump supportive media is overjoyed at this prospect, let's start from the beginning. Who is Kash Patel?
He's a really interesting and complicated figure. To your point, he's polarizing. Trump loyalists absolutely love Kash Patel, and everyone else, media, people who are never Trump Republicans, cannot stand Kash Patel and are somewhat frightened of him. So the basics about Kash Patel, he's 44 years old. He grew up in Long Island. He was actually raised Hindu by Indian immigrant parents. His father fled Idi Amin, according to Kash Patel's accounts. He also, this is something you've heard Republicans start to mention as they've defended his nomination to head up the FBI. He worked as a public defender, first in Miami-Dade County after he graduated law school in 2005, and then as a federal public defender down in Miami as well for almost a decade before he jumped up to the Department of Justice. He got what he considered a, quote, dream job in 2013. That was obviously during the Obama administration when he worked for the Department of Justice on national security issues. And it was from that post that he ended up becoming senior counsel to Devin Nunes, who was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee during the early years of the Trump administration, when the Russia collusion narrative started to congeal into something also very polarizing. And Freddie, I thought it might be helpful actually to take a look at a clip from a documentary that was based on Lee Smith, who's written for UnHerd, his book, The Plot Against the President. Kash Patel is a hugely important figure in that film, but also in the broader investigation that it tackles.
Kash, I believe, brought a very different energy to that team. As Jack Langer says, who's the communications director, Jack said, it was a relatively sleepy committee. We barely spoke to the press. You know, they're pretty easygoing, they're mellow, and here's Kash. I mean, he's an ethnic New Yorker from Queens, New York, Indian family, who lived in Africa, and he just brought an entirely new energy to that team.
Kash was fundamental to gathering information and pushing this. He's got great instincts. This is a guy who really understands the players. Kash knows the intelligence community like I know the State Department.
When he came in to talk to me and started walking me through like some of the problems at DOJ, just kind of big picture problems. And almost on the spot, I said, "Do you want a job?"
I told Devin, I said, "Yeah, I'll take the job, But I was so upset at the lack of internal accountability at the DOJ and the FBI that I said, we have to, whatever we find, we're putting out. And I said, look, if we find something that's bad, we're putting it out. And he goes, deal.
Right, so that's evidently where he became, some people would say, radicalized, politicized, and certainly reached the notice of Trump's circle, because he felt that that line of attack on Trump based around the Russia scandal was partisan. It was not good lawmaking. Is that really where he kind of came to the fore?
Yes, and everything you just said is, I think, part of why he's such an interesting figure. Some reports, there have been a number of profiles into his meteoric rise by this point. The Atlantic has profiled him, the New York Times has profiled him, Washington Post has profiled him, and by some accounts, and even his own book, what really started to irk him about the Justice Department and the system is actually when he was working as a public defender on the federal level, and then in his early years at the Department of Justice, that he started to get this creeping sense. He started to become more conservative, not overly partisan, some accounts say, people who knew him at the time say, but he, by his own account, started to get the sense that there was something being weaponized against Americans. And when he steps into his role with Devin Nunes, things got really interesting really quickly, because in their quest to defend Donald Trump, some Republicans started to look at how these surveillance opportunities had come about. People like Carter Page, names that are easy to forget and are part of this really complicated story that Lee Smith and Amanda Milius, the filmmaker behind Plot Against the President, that clip we just looked into, they're putting together this incredibly complicated puzzle, putting it together along with people like David Ignatius of the Washington Post, who tends to be pretty defensive of organizations like the FBI and the CIA. He's referred to Kash Patel as saying he appeared so frequently in so many incarnations that he was almost a Zelig figure in President Donald Trump's confrontation as what he imagined as the deep state. In the span of 4 years, Patel rose from an obscure Hill staffer to become one of the most powerful players in the national security apparatus. And as you say, Freddie, that all started with Patel allying himself with Devin Nunes, as we heard both of them explain there. And from that point, he just kept rising and rising.
So the Nunes memo, which gets a lot of play, you hear it mentioned a lot. What was that? And is it true that Kash Patel actually wrote it? Because that's kind of the backbone of these allegations that the whole Russia accusation was politicized and wasn't properly conducted.
It's so easy to forget what a frenzy popped up around the Nunes memo back in 2018. The Nunes memo was a document that Kash Patel is reported to have been the primary author of. He was absolutely involved in stitching together the Nunes memo. It was something that Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee wanted to put out. Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, and this is when Republicans had the majority in the House, so it was before Adam Schiff took over the committee. It was when Nunes was the chairman of the committee. Both sides were fighting over this memo. An inspector general named Michael Horowitz has validated a lot of the claims of the Nunes memo, which essentially state that the Steele dossier was improperly a predicate for FISA, so Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that's named for a bill that was passed actually after the Church Committee in the 70s. It was improperly used to spy on Carter Page, who was affiliated with the Trump campaign back in 2016. Michael Horowitz has said those claims have been vindicated by his inspector general probe into the FBI's conduct. And, even David Ignatius has said that that Patel hit, quote, pay dirt in some of his investigations when he was working for Devin Nunes. So this is more from David Ignatius in the Washington Post. He says, Patel was the main author of a January 2018 House Intelligence Committee report recounting abuses by the FBI in its application for electronic surveillance of former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The Democrats at the time were reluctant to agree. Facts that emerged later showed serious abuses in the Page investigation, and a former FBI lawyer pleaded guilty last year to falsifying information that was used to apply for warrants from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. So again, that's David Ignatius, an institutional loyalist to the FBI and the CIA, who put it right there that Patel did sometimes hit, quote unquote, pay dirt.
So what's interesting here is that the kind of origin story of Kash Patel is intricately connected to the mixture of politics and justice, right? That's the accusation that he is making against the then administration, against the FBI as was, that it had become political in its pursuit of Donald Trump. And now, fast forward 8 years, no doubt people in the Trump campaign are seeing some kind of poetic justice in the idea that this same person might be put in charge of the FBI. But meanwhile, the political opponents, you mentioned a couple of them at the start, people who are understandably perhaps frightened or outraged or scandalized in some way that this nomination is being suggested, they are saying kind of the exact opposite, that this is proof, this suggestion that Kash Patel will take over the FBI is proof of improper involvement of politics in the justice process. So it's a kind of a chicken and the egg, isn't it? It's like, where did it start and where does it end?
That is exactly the right way to put it. I think this is going to be the big debate on Capitol Hill as Patel's confirmation hearings progress. Is it a proper weaponization of the government to fight the weaponization of the government? This is a question that Republicans have to answer. It's a question that Kash Patel has to answer. And Kash Patel, since Donald Trump left office, has been making this case, prosecuting this case for what should happen at the FBI in all kinds of different venues. He's hosted a show for the Epic Times called Cash's Corner. Freddie, he has authored children's books.
Emily, I think I have to pause on the children's books because I've seen some of those front covers and I'd love to put a couple on the screen here. Tell us about those children's books in a little bit more detail.
Yes, I think the best way to describe them is sort of semi-fictitious autobiographical children's books. He's actually sort of casts himself as a wizard in the children's book. I think it's called The Plot Against the King. I think there are actually 3 different iterations of this. There's like versions 1, 2, and 3 by now. Maybe they were selling really well. Hard to actually tell.
The king,
but,
just to be clear, is Donald. He's King Donald.
Yeah, oh yeah. The king is King Donald. They're very cringy. They are, I guess, tongue-in-cheek maybe is the best. That is the most charitable description of them. But Kash Patel has been hawking merch for years. He's on the board of Trump Media. He's still very close with Devin Nunes, and Trump Media obviously is overseeing Truth Social. So Kash Patel has been in these, I mean, I would say grifty Trump loyalist circles in the last several years.
I mean, I hope he sold some of those children's books because King Donald is certainly a gift to his political opponents at this point, whose whole mission is to show that this is anti-democratic. This is part of the installation of Donald Trump as some kind of person above the law, a person who's not going to be constrained in the normal way. What they seem to be most worried about is that having such a hyper-loyalist who maybe doesn't have, well, I think it's fair to say doesn't have a conventional CV for this kind of seniority of position in such an influential role that is traditionally kind of kept at some remove from the president, seems to be an escalation of presidential power and a move away from checks on power. Let's read some quotes from one of the opponents of this process, Never Trumper David Frum. He has a piece in The Atlantic called "A Constitutional Crisis Greater Than Watergate. Trump's nomination of Kash Patel threatens to turn the FBI into an instrument of personal presidential power." I mean, that's the thrust of the argument. I'll read a couple of sentences from the conclusion. "The American people," says David Frum, "voted for cheaper eggs. They're going to get only noise, conflict, and chaos. What Trump is trying will, if successful, be a constitutional scandal far greater than Watergate. If he succeeds, the seizure of power he unsuccessfully attempted in 2021 could be underway in 2025. So that's what the people on the other side of this argument to Kash Patel are saying.
Kash Patel, again, would be so eager to confront a question like this because what he would say, returning to the chicken and the egg point, and even the invocation of Watergate by David Frum there is, well, shouldn't an FBI director be sacked if, eventually it's proven to be true that there was improper surveillance of somebody on a presidential campaign, somebody like Carter Page? He would say that actually what happened is Watergate, what was worse than Watergate, was the abuse of the Department of Justice and the FBI in surveilling the Trump campaign. And actually, we hear conservatives say that a lot, that what happened in Russiagate was much worse than Watergate. So that'll actually be a kind of welcome invocation. But the reason that David Frum and others are going to be really nervous about Kash Patel is because he's, again, been making the rounds over the last several years in the podcast circuit, explaining basically exactly what he would do to the FBI. He was rumored to potentially be taking high jobs at the CIA, potentially CIA director. When Trump flirted with making him deputy director of the FBI at the end of his presidency, actually Bill Barr, who's somebody, a reluctant Trump supporter, probably is the best way to describe Bill Barr, said it would happen over his dead body, when he was attorney general at the time. So it's not even just the people like David Frum who are upset about Kash Patel. There are a lot of people in official Washington that are upset about it.
I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon, and you know those guys. I'm not going to go out there and say their names right now so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them. But, excuse me, the one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go-around is we got to put in all America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. And the one thing we will do that they never will do is we will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics and actually issuing them as lawfare. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice. And Steve, this is why they hate us.
I doubt Kash Patel's plans have changed at all over the course of the last year when, Donald Trump was hit by a bullet, and there have been multiple scandals actually since that recording. And at the time, Bannon was talking about him potentially being tapped as CIA director. But I imagine that Kash Patel is probably even more excited to take up a post if he's confirmed.
So what he says there, the first part of it is pretty much standard Trump playbook, which is that we need his people this time round. He's not going to be defeated by the deep state. He's not going to be, have the institutions against him. He's going to make sure he has loyalists in every position from top to bottom. That much we know already, no news. The attack on the media or the sense that he's going to actually potentially go after individual journalists, prosecute them perhaps, do you think that is plausible in a Kash confirmed as FBI director scenario?
One of the things he's talking about with Bannon there is that they are quote unquote dead serious, and Trump is dead serious about actually putting these plans into action. The context of that conversation was Bannon basically being like, this is a lot of talk, but can this actually happen? So I take them at their word that they are quote unquote dead serious about doing what they are saying that they're planning to do. I don't know. He says whether it's civilly or criminally going after journalists, he says he doesn't know. He says we'll figure it out.
Let's just workshop this for 1 second. Give me an example of someone they could actually go after. So he seems to be referring to the Hunter Biden scandal there. Is that what you picked up? That he was referring to people in the media who were covering up stories that may have hurt Joe Biden's run for the presidency in 2020?
I was going to say, I think it's probably that, but it's even more broadly anything that has to do with targeting Trump for Russia collusion, anything from like 2016 or maybe even 2015 that has to do with alleging Trump was involved in foreign interference. From the perspective of, that conversation was CIA, but from the perspective of now, if he's at the FBI, civilly or criminally is the point that he's making, I think it's really hard to figure out what means they would have. It would be somebody maybe like Natasha Bertrand, who, Glenn Greenwald, someone on the left, has referred to as the Typhoid Mary of the Russia collusion story. Kash Patel is intimately familiar with people like Natasha Bertrand's record when it came to publishing stories. David Ignatius himself, who we've cited here, could be somebody that comes under the microscope, but I don't know what the pathways civilly or criminally look like to prosecuting journalists, because defamation in the United States, you have to clear an incredibly high bar, and I think rightfully so. So I just don't understand.
But you couldn't use defamation. I mean, we'd have to get a lawyer on this, but you couldn't really have a sitting president suing a journalist for defamation about something they said 8 years ago. That doesn't sound realistic.
One thing they've talked about, this wouldn't even fall really under the purview of the DOJ, but maybe he would be able to provide evidence. He's talked about like really making everything transparent and putting everything publicly. We even heard that in the clip from Plot Against the President. He talked about he wants everything to be made public. So maybe what he could do is declassify a lot of information that would help somebody like Brendan Carr at the FCC, who has talked about and has implicitly threatened the broadcast licenses of some networks. He could potentially add kind of ammunition to the case for doing that. So there are different ways that he could maybe even just be transparent about information.
So it could it'd be like the Twitter files on steroids, where he could suddenly say, okay, ABC, CBS, NBC, you need to disclose all internal messages related to the Hunter Biden story to the federal government, to the FBI as part of our investigation into whether there was collusion or whatever, and let them be known. And then suddenly there's going to be a lot of people who may have said embarrassing things, and that could cause an enormous story that could drag on for years.
Right. And we've heard senators like Josh Hawley, for example, call for a new church committee in recent weeks. And I think that's a very attractive idea to Republicans like Kash Patel, that we would have another reckoning. And the church committee came after Watergate, actually, to investigate Hoover-era abuses and abuses of the CIA under people like Alan Dulles and others. So that idea of uncovering all of this is really attractive to Republicans, and having a sort of truth and reconciliation committee, as Trump and others have talked about, for the intelligence agencies. And Kash Patel is somebody who would really want to do that. And I'm sure, just as the church committee did, this would dig up damaging information about journalists who uncritically took leaks from the FBI. That's particularly relevant when it comes to Russia collusion. But whether any of their misdeeds are civil or criminal violations, I mean, I have a really hard time seeing how they make that case. Maybe they have some creative legal theory to do it, but the fact that Patel hasn't actually even outlined that so far, I think speaks to the difficulty they will have.
I suppose the line here is going to be between those people who are excited about the idea of justice as they see it, coming to people who acted poorly in recent years. Right? This is the long-awaited, now finally delivered justice, and they could be very excited about that. But then there'll come a point where this all seems like a lot of energy from a huge bully pulpit of the presidency, where you have this close ally who can literally instigate investigations into people. And even some of those loyalists, I think, if it passes a certain threshold, will start to feel a bit spooked that this is feeling too much. Maybe instead of it being Truth and Reconciliation Committee, it starts feeling a bit McCarthyite, and people start feeling a bit anxious. I mean, John Bolton is here comparing Kash Patel to a Soviet secret police leader called Lavrentiy Beria. Trump has nominated Kash Patel to be his Lavrentiy Beria, Bolton said. Now, as we know, Bolton is not a great fan of Donald Trump, at least not anymore. But that's the fear, isn't it? And the question is whether that threshold is reached.
Bolton and Kash Patel actually personally butted heads when they were both working in the first Trump administration. So to your point, Freddie, not entirely surprising quote, but if we play clip 3, this is Kash Patel on Sean Ryan's very popular podcast, addressing directly what he would do if he were the head of the FBI. It's very interesting because you can understand exactly why a lot of people in official Washington would be incredibly uncomfortable, even Republicans, with what's to come.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big. And the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and rapists and drug dealers and violent offenders. What do you need 7,000 people there for? Same thing with DOJ. What are all these people doing here?
What is the answer to his question, Emily? I mean, what do the 7,000 people do in the FBI headquarters? presumably some of them are doing useful things.
Well, yeah, I think that's an important point. And Patel made it himself in the answer, but it is probably going to be the most pressing question that Patel's fellow Republicans have for him during confirmation hearings, which is this the lobbing of the metaphorical grenade, something we talked about when Matt Gaetz was nominated to head up the entire DOJ, and just sort of exploding and seeing where the pieces land, but not really having a plan to rebuild at a department that obviously has some important tasks like investigating crime. So if there are 7,000 people, how many of those people are seriously needed, and they need to have high morale, and they need to have a good sense of direction? And does the effort to just sort of blow up the department metaphorically hurt their ability to actually protect Americans and keep people safe and prosecute serious crimes or pursue serious criminals? That is a question that I think Kash Patel is going to face. And it's probably why in that conversation with Sean Ryan, which was taped before the election actually happened, that is why I think Kash Patel said, I would get rid of everyone at the Hoover building and tell them to go fight crime. That's probably what he's going to say. He's refocusing the department to do. It has all of these sort of excess powers that have developed over the course of the war on terrorism, and all of these different far-reaching new responsibilities that have just been mission creep. Let's focus on actually fighting crime. But can you do that and also blow up the FBI at the same time is a hugely important question for Kash Patel.
It follows the pattern, doesn't it? Maybe this latest idea is the most kind of out there version of it, but the pattern is the same across a lot of these departments. Department of Education want to shut it down, put in someone who doesn't like it very much. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. definitely doesn't like the Department of Health very much. He thinks it's corrupt and it's done all sorts of evil things. The list is long. In department after department, he's putting people who are antagonistic towards their own department. It's going to be a kind of dust-up like has never been seen before. And I don't know what happens within those agencies. I mean, what happens? 7,000 people versus one new head of that agency. Who wins?
I mean, before the modern conservative movement really was even the modern conservative movement, the right in America started mobilizing against Woodrow Wilson, especially as he expanded the federal bureaucracy, as there was this move towards technocracy, that we could have new departments. Even Richard Nixon signed the legislation that created the EPA or some of these departments. There was this idea that this optimism about technocracy that really grew the size and scope of the federal government here in Washington, D.C. And the American right has sort of always the official conservative movement, the Republican Party, but the William F. Buckley types, Ronald Reagan especially, have really been opposed to the growth of the federal government because it has created what conservatives have described for decades as mission creep. And now that the mission creep has gone on for decades and conservatives have watched that, they felt that no Republican president has ever had the guts, basically, to do what's necessary and lob the metaphorical grenades into all of these departments. And what they feel like is happening now is the sort of fantasy is on the precipice of coming true. And that is where there will be a lot of excitement and a lot of, I guess, enthusiasm for confirming Kash Patel. It's going to feel like almost a desperate bid among Republicans because this is the opportunity they feel that they have never had, conservatives feel they've never had, to actually go after the departments. It's going to be an uphill battle, that is for sure, on Capitol Hill.
Okay, well, take us to that battle then, Emily. The confirmation hearing. Will it even get to a hearing? Will he be pulling out like previous candidates before then? Or do you think the hearing happens and the vote happens, and do you think he gets confirmed?
Well, former Republican Congressman Joe Scarborough, funny enough, actually said himself that he hopes this sort of goes the way of the Gaetz nomination.
This is not only bad for the rule of law. This is not only bad for the First Amendment. This is not only bad for the United States of America. This is bad for Donald Trump. This is bad for the Trump administration. This is not going to end well. So I think the best case scenario for everybody is that Kash Patel and this talk of Kash Patel ends like the Matt Gaetz nomination ended. Because this will not go well for anybody. And I still believe there will be 4 Republican senators who will not vote to confirm somebody who says he's going to throw judges in jail, he's going to throw bureaucrats in jail, he's going to throw reporters in jail who did not go along with the 2020 Stop the Steal conspiracy.
Worth reminding our audience there, this may be ancient history, but Joe Scarborough at one stage was a Republican. David Frum, Republican. John Bolton has worked in Republican administrations. The people who are being most vocal against this are people who somewhere feel they have a conservative background.
Also interesting, Andrew McCabe was on CNN, and he is so reviled by most people on the right and even Republicans in D.C., but he had very, very harsh words for Kash Patel when asked on CNN about it.
It's a terrible development for the men and women of the FBI and also for the nation that depends on a highly functioning, professional, independent Federal Bureau of Investigation. The fact that Kash Patel is profoundly unqualified for this job is not even like a matter for debate. So I think what we should really be thinking about right now is, what does this signal in terms of Donald Trump's intent for the FBI? The installation, or the nomination, I guess we should say at this point, of Kash Patel as FBI director can only possibly be a plan to disrupt, to dismantle, to distract the FBI, and to possibly use it as a tool for the president's political agenda.
So Andrew McCabe is the former deputy director of the FBI. He is targeted by Trump and Trump's allies as somebody who was actually a pretty critical part of developing the Russia collusion hoax, as they say. And so Andrew McCabe, it's not a surprise that he's so bitterly opposed to the nomination of Kash Patel, because he's somebody actually that Kash Patel will almost certainly be targeting for potential criminal wrongdoing if he is confirmed as FBI director. But I think, Freddie, the value of what listening to what McCabe says there is getting a glimpse into the pressures that will be put on especially Democrats, of course, to oppose this nomination, but really on everybody. This is somebody who represents the way that a lot of careers, or people who have spent their careers at the FBI, are thinking about Kash Patel. They are vehemently opposed to it. They're terrified of it and see it as a very, very serious development, not just for the safety of the country, but perhaps even their personal freedom, their personal safety, if Kash Patel comes after them.
I mean, could there be mass walkouts? Is there a union that can oppose it? Could there be refusals to come to work? I mean, it sounds like Kash Patel wouldn't be too upset about that because he wants to clear the building out anyway. But I mean, what kind of collective action could the FBI employees take?
If there are mass walkouts, Kash Patel is going to probably be happy about it, because that's sort of a self-purge. He doesn't have to necessarily even suss out the loyalties of the people who work at the FBI. If they're willing to walk off the job, that tells him what he needs to know. But is it the case that you would have so many people walking off the job that the FBI is actually unable to function? How can you replace those people quickly in a way that keeps the country, or keeps the FBI functioning in a way that it has to? And Kash Patel is actually interesting because on Sean Ryan's podcast, as we were listening to earlier, he says he's not one of the people that totally wants to get rid of FISA. He doesn't want to just throw all of these powers out the window, he says, because he thinks that there's a significant domestic need to surveil potential terrorists who have entered the country. He's not somebody who is a totally blow it all up type of guy, but he does talk like he's a totally blow it up type of guy. He was on the NSC. He was somebody who was close with DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Rick Grinnell. That's what Tulsi Gabbard has been nominated to do now. And then he became the deputy to the acting director of the Pentagon, chief of staff to the acting director of the Pentagon. So he's now familiar with these organizations, but he had kind of a truncated experience with all of them. He saw a lot of it really quickly over the course of the Trump administration. So he knows the bureaucracy. He does come from the Department of Justice. He has seen all of these institutions. But is he able to, somebody who hasn't spent his life at the FBI, somebody like Andy McCabe, is he able to even wrangle it in a way that fulfills his mission? That is a huge, huge question.
Let me end with this big picture theory, and you can tell me why it's wrong. There is a spectrum on the Republican side of how radical individuals are. right? You have the president, you have J.D. Vance, then you have people like Kevin Roberts. We had him here in the studio telling us about Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. You then have people like Kash Patel, who are maybe one step even more radical than that. And then you have your Steve Bannons, and it goes on right until you're like a Twitter anon who just wants to blow up the whole government. The president has to pick a point on this spectrum in the next 4 years. And whichever point he picks, there will be people who are more radical who think he's not being radical enough, he's being a sellout. Meanwhile, there will be people who are more establishment who think he's being too radical. So I just can't see how this doesn't end in resignations one way or the other, because kind of wherever Donald Trump stops, there are going to be some of his, even within his cabinet, probably, some people who think he's not going far enough, and some people think he's gone too far.
Yeah, I mean, just the clash between somebody like Tulsi Gabbard and somebody like John Ratcliffe at the CIA, or somebody like Kash Patel at FBI and John Ratcliffe at CIA, somebody who is a Trump loyalist in Ratcliffe, but also kind of an institutionalist. You can foresee absolutely that there will be clashes, internecine battles that happen just between guys like that within the cabinet itself, within the administration itself. And I think Trump likes that to some extent. He said that he liked having John Bolton kind of fight with people like Kash Patel, for example, in his last administration. So to some extent, he welcomes it. But I think probably one of the biggest questions about the Trump administration is exemplified in the person of Kash Patel himself. Can you blow everything up and function efficiently at the same time?
And would it be fair to say that that administration, now that it's shaping up, is starting to look more ideological than Trump himself? When you look at some of these positions, and actually in comparison to some of these guys, Trump himself is quite pragmatic. He's someone who likes to compromise, make a deal. At least that was the evidence of his first time in office. He also likes the economy. He likes the stock market doing well. He likes some kind of stability. So if anything, that we could face the situation where Trump himself is the brake on his own administration.
Yeah, this is an ongoing theme of Donald Trump's sort of political career is to what extent does he want to be seen as a unifier, and to what extent does he want to be seen as a bomb thrower? He wants to sort of be at the middle of the Venn diagram, or at the intersection of both. He wants to throw bombs in a way that feels unifying. And he's been good at that when it comes to immigration. For example, one of the things he realized is that his bomb throwing on immigration was way more unifying than a lot of the career politicians' takes on immigration. But it doesn't apply across the board. And does Donald Trump have an ideological position on the Health and Human Services Department the way Robert F. Kennedy Jr. does? No, of course he doesn't. It's such a niche position anyway that it was pragmatic for him, as you say, to appoint RFK Jr. to that position. But does it become pragmatic for him to continue backing up RFK Jr. in that position when he takes away the Fruit Loops? How does Donald Trump react to that? Huge question.
I think he even said, Robert F. Kennedy has a thing he wants to do. I'm going to let him go and do it. It's almost like he didn't even...
he said, go wild.
Go wild. He didn't even understand the details, especially. He was like, oh, he's got this idea. I'm going to let him have a go. But, as we've seen before, if it reaches a point where it's a problem for him, if he reaches a point where he's getting more blowback than he likes, or things start practically going wrong, you could see a President Trump too flipping quite quickly on some of these characters and pulling the rug from under their feet. I feel like you saw a little glimpse of that with the Scott Bessent nomination, because Elon Musk, his absolute best friend at the moment, the person who accompanies him everywhere, who seems to be absolute apple of his eye, had been on Twitter, which seemed to me to be a bit of a test of his authority, saying, don't appoint Scott Bessent. He's just business as usual guy. We need to go more radical than that. In fact, what Trump did, he waited a couple of days and appointed him anyway, which to me was a bit of a kind of slap down to Elon Musk. It was saying, okay, yes, you're influential, I like you, but I'm in charge here and I'm not going to necessarily listen to you. And that's another instinct inside Donald Trump that we've seen a lot. We could see a lot more with some of these more out there characters.
I will say that Donald Trump is obviously conscious of his legacy. And so in a sense, you can imagine him thinking, I don't have to get reelected. History will judge the actions of Kash Patel to reform the FBI, just as they judged Frank Church. And we will look positively upon these significant, severe reforms to the FBI, even if there's media hysteria and public polling that goes against me now. This is important enough. They targeted me personally. My grudge is, telling me this has to be done. So it's worth doing. he doesn't have to get reelected. So maybe he is more lenient towards somebody like Kash Patel in terms of giving him, a leash, or letting him off the leash even, to, quote, go wild at the FBI like he told Bobby Kennedy to do at HHS. So we'll see, Freddie.
We will see. Emily, I'm very glad we have you there to help make sense of it for us. I promised everyone a fair hearing. I think that's what you gave him. We'll be talking again soon.
Thanks, Freddie.
That was Emily Jashinsky, the DC correspondent for UnHerd, giving us the lowdown on Kash Patel. There you have it. Now you know a lot more, I suspect, than you did 40 odd minutes ago. Thanks for tuning in. This, as ever, was UnHerd.